Hello and welcome again to a new episode in the Transformation Dynamics briefing series. The topic today is again about project dynamics and how to develop new products. And the focus is on the dynamic impact and understanding how the feedback structures actually impact the work that we do in the new product or new service development. So during this course and during the webinar, I will share some strategies and tactics. And as always, you're welcome to join the extended briefing. The question really at the core is still, why are projects running over schedule and over budget, and what does it mean for our transformation effort? So today I want to touch again on some of the topics and want to provide a very brief recap of what we discussed in the first set of this talk. So typically we're planning something like this, a fairly straight line forecast, but oftentimes what happens is something like this. So the movement is there interrupted and the progress sometimes is interrupted, and sometimes even the projects fail altogether, and we see a higher level of budget that is required actually to finish the project, and it's not typically coming in a straight line forecast. So there's a schedule and a budget overrun. Again, today I want to walk you through some of the key findings. My name is Thomas Wittig. I am the CEO at WITTIGONIA, and I will be leading you through the talk today. What I propose for this week that we cover in the webinar, and also much more actually in the extended course, is I want to talk a little bit about productizing services and competing demands and what it means when we have scope changes. We know this from fairly high profile projects, but of course it happens also in our development projects. As always, there's a lot more to say about this. So if you have questions or if you'd like to suggest or request a specific scenario that we look into, please submit your questions either in the associated Facebook page or in the course website, where we have a dedicated discussion group. Again, for orientation, we are here right now at the, one level up actually, at the second iteration of the development dynamics projects. And we were talking about this already in the earlier version. This was one of the first two topics that we actually covered. So you may want to check this content as well. Each week we are offering a live webinar with, let's say, a short presentation and some Q&A time. And also there is a what I call the discount down opportunity. So we as we're building up this course, you get a chance to get a very preferred rate for accessing the extended content. But as always, the free webinars will also be available as live webinars, and either you get the link automatically when you sign up to the webinar, or you can find it in YouTube. What you can find in the extended course is much more about strategies, tactics, business simulations, and how-to guides, etc. It is designed as a group coaching opportunity, so you can, but you don't have to engage in a group discussion, but you can also just kick back, relax, and watch at your own time and pace the video briefings and get some insights and inspiration from that. Also, I announced this earlier, I have bundled another course within this course, which is about how to make your case. And within that course, you will find also some additional tools and tips and tricks and downloadable material, for example, for doing reality checks and feasibility checks for project plans. So I think that's a pretty useful content. And this was also a course which I taught earlier about how to prepare and pitch your proposal. So this is what I have in mind today. I want to talk after I did I've been doing a recap. I want to talk a little bit more about some impacts of the scope changes, and also the what it means when you have a resource allocation shortage. As some businesses actually want to try to pull off a project development with existing resources. For example, if you are a service organization of any kind, large or small, and you have a wealth of knowledge, a lot of companies want to productize that and package that up in some kind of software as a service or application or whatever. And so we call this productizing. And we'll take a look at that, what that actually means. And then this is more for the extended stuff. We won't have time for this in the webinar today, or maybe I make a special seminar out of this. I want to talk more about project risk, about schedule and budget risk. So how to go about assessing the risk and moving above and beyond what you can see on the sheet of paper that you have prepared for your project plan. All right. So again, there's a webinar special for those of you who signed in the webinar room. You typically find this on your right-hand side. This is only running in the webinar, and this gives you a special rate, a special access to the extended course and to the entire course, not only to this episode or the subset talking about project dynamics, but everything, including organization dynamics, migrating the customer base strategy, and so on. There's no risk involved. If you really don't like it, you can return it within 30 days, but I'm pretty sure that you get some inspiration out of this. Okay, without further ado, a quick recap. We were talking about the framework for transformation dynamics, and I came up with this framework because I noticed and I realized over the years that there are certain areas and challenges associated to the areas which make it difficult to drive a transformation initiative. And by transformation, we mean basically turning a business into something else, something new. For example, in driving a product development effort, or moving from a purely service-oriented business to a service and product-oriented business. So people want to drive a software as a service product, or vice versa. That's a very common scenario that I'm dealing a lot with right now, which is about product companies. So for example, software product companies who have a legacy solution, and now they want to move into the brave new world of software as a service, cloud, etc. And they realize it's not so easy. There are some challenges associated to that. So that led me to look at this from a system dynamic perspective. I'm an educated system and data science expert and system dynamics modeler. And I have prepared a set of models that we can use along this journey to find out how the feedback structure, something like this, is actually translating into the dynamic behavior of the whole system or a given sector. Now, this is something that I put together on a very high level, which basically is a very high level snapshot, which came from a whiteboard discussion with the client. And the topic here was, well, if we have product developers and we drive product innovation, and the more progress is being perceived by the organization, the more support we get for our product initiative. So this is kind of a feedback loop you could call success to the successful. But also the product innovation, of course, has an implication on sales. And the more sales we generate, the more revenue we can recognize, which we can invest in sales and marketing people, which again can drive more, win more customers and drive more sales actually. But more revenue also means that we have a positive impact because we can afford to hire more developers. So these are a set of, let's say, very basic feedback loops. But then we said, okay, what if we look at this a little bit closer? And then I stepped into each one of these areas, like the organization, the customer base, market, and the project development areas. And I explained the underlying feedback structures in very easy to read stock and flow diagrams. And then we ran the simulations that I prepared to figure out what is actually happening, and does it really relate to the real world, and what can we learn from these models for the real world projects and vice versa. And yet a topic that we have to discover is about the supply chains, which we're getting somewhat into today, because today we're talking about the project dynamics again. So first of all, the interchange between, let's say, the project development and the organization. But also there is, of course, a feedback loop. So if we want to drive a project effort, we're requesting staffing, for example, from our colleagues who are in the HR or hiring department. And then they tap into a supply chain of, let's say, full-time employees or outsourced delivery. And so we get more staff. As if we get more staff, we can drive more projects and so on. So that's one thing we take a look at. But then on the other hand, as I mentioned before, typically we find that most organizations are not only doing project development for new products, but there's also a service business associated to this. And the service business can either be, let's say, net new requests coming from the market or from our existing customer base. So they're requesting services and we're delivering the services to the customer, to the field, for example. So then I'm taking a shortcut now. So the basic idea of driving a product development effort is, of course, that you have an idea, you want to turn it into a product, then you release it to the market, and then eventually you're facing this very nice S-shaped growth curve, which I talked about in detail in the market dynamics class. And I will cover that again in the second iteration of the market dynamics class. So that's, of course, the desire here. But what actually happens between the product planning and design and then actually the go-to-market? So, and there I explained more in detail what is the, let's say, the system structure, the strategic architecture, and how development projects get done. So now I'm not explaining coding or project management per se, but I'm giving you a different perspective from a system dynamics point of view. So think about it this way. We have, let's say we're adding a certain scope to our project. So we have an amount of work that needs to be done. And if we do it correctly, the work gets completed and eventually we can release the product to the market. It's all good. But, and here this, again, is a shortcut. If you want to have the detailed step-by-step walkthrough, you may want to watch again the episode or the first episode about project dynamics. But here's basically how it works. Some of the work actually contains errors because we have a certain fraction of errors that we naturally have when we're designing things or developing things. So this work is, let's say, in the first step, undiscovered rework. And then after some time delay, we're recovering that, there's a major problem in the product, or we get feedback from the market. And then we have to rework that. And this, of course, adds to our work that needs to get done. And so that's an important feedback loop, as we will see in a moment. And then, of course, the work that we need to do and the schedule and our productivity of the development staff determines how many people we actually need. And so by hiring this pool of people, we can actually drive and open this valve here, and then we can complete a lot of tasks, which actually then turn into our product. And sometimes we have to deal with scope changes. So that's, of course, a big problem for a lot of projects, large and small projects. But I would say the larger the project and the more, let's say, complex it is and the more dynamic it is, the more these feedback loops play out. But we will talk about that a little bit in detail because I get a lot of questions about that naturally from a lot of project teams. So the question is always about resources. So how many people do we need by when, and what should we factor into the plan? So then again, let's take a look at how this scenario plays out. So I'm not walking you in this particular session through the simulation model, but I'm again planning to bring it online so that you can play with it again. So here we have two scenarios. One, let's say the red scenario is what I call the dream scenario. There's actually a small error here in the legend here, I just realized, but let me explain it to you. So this scenario basically means, okay, in a world without delays, without any errors, we should be able to accomplish our work that needs to be done fairly quickly. And then as people roll off the project, we eventually will finish the project sometime here. But if we factor in the delays, a certain error fraction in our work, what is happening is something like this. And there you can see how it can easily lead to a delay in the work that we get completed. But it also means that we have to factor in more staff. So here's a difference in staff level because we factor in an amount of rework. But as the rework discovery loop kicks in, this level of staff is going up. Now, this is a small-scale project. I'm just using it as an example here. But also, what you can see, in the real world, we typically hold people longer on the project because there's a lot more work that needs to be done as we discover the rework, and that leads to a schedule overrun and a budget overrun. And surprise, surprise, the budget overrun is not linear. So which means if we have a 10% error fraction in our project here, that doesn't lead to 1K plus 10%, so 1100 person days that we accomplished, but much more. So it is actually accelerating the rate of works, or sorry, it's actually accentuating the amount of work that we need to do. So that's important to keep in mind. Now, to the key question for the webinar today, and I promise to keep it more concise today. What is the impact of a scope change? So if we, in the middle of a project, have to deal with a scope change. Now, what I'm simulating here is a scope change which happens somewhere around month 3, I think it is. So we're adding 20% to our scope. It jumps up from 1,000 person days to 1,100 person days. So that's the new scope of the project. And naturally, of course, our work that needs to be completed is jumping up, and our fraction complete is delayed, of course. And our budget is also going up again. Sorry, going back here. So, but again, not in a linear fashion. So even we added only a certain percent. This is leading to a nonlinear increase in the budget in terms of the person days that we expend on the project as we accomplish the work. Now, that's really important to keep in mind. And I would really suggest that we pay more attention to the rework that is required in a project and everything related to that. So practical things that we need to do is, first of all, factor in the rework in the development plans, but then also finding a way to figure out if there are hidden errors in the work that we have submitted for the release of the product. Now, in the software service world, for example, the way we do that is through testing, or in a very agile project, we do a test-driven approach, which means we're discovering the rework much earlier, and then we can prevent us from surprises. Otherwise, if we discover it late with a delay, even after people have rolled off the project, we might be actually in big trouble. So, but also again, the amount of additional scope that we're adding in here is leading to a much higher level in staffing, right? And then again, you can plug in your own values for your scope of the project and the delays, etc. So it gives you different values in the simulation model that we're going to publish about this. But what happens when there is a competing resource demand? And this is really important, because in many service businesses we find something like this, which is let's say a fairly cyclical behavior. So here what we're looking at is a very typical seasonal business, but it's not only seasonal. With let's say on an annual basis, you can see that towards the end of the year it's dying down a little bit, and in the middle of the year it's going up again, going down, up again. But there are also, let's say, these ripple effects on the thing, so it's not totally even. So, and that's very typical for a lot of service businesses. And I took this as an example, and I normalized it without, let's say, a growth rate. Of course, many businesses have a certain growth rate. They grow at 10% or 20% clip a year. And that's a different thing. But just to keep things a little bit easier, I was interested in taking these data and figuring out what does it actually mean to our project. And if we pay more attention here to this side, this is basically, if we limit the staff to the available capacity that we have in the service business, we are at the mercy of the service business, and we can only deliver when the service business has, let's say, a certain available capacity. So here, for example, in this time when the backlog is going down, there are available people sitting on the bench, and we can actually use them for our service delivery effort, product delivery effort. But what that means actually is we can only make progress every once in a while. And as you can see here, it will take forever to finish a product. So of course, it really depends on the amount of work that we have available, but also the overall level of staffing. If you talk about a 10,000 people organization, which has, let's say, these swings in the organization, it might actually give you a substantial number of people. But again, in our fairly small size example, there's not much you can do in a setting like this. So especially for small companies, it's probably not really feasible to take a look at the existing stuff and think about a productization strategy, because you're typically caught in the competing demands between service and the software delivery business. Okay, so that basically means that you have to open the valves here and make sure that you're also hiring for product development. And this is an example where, when you, again, this is the red curve here, when you hire for product development, you might have higher levels of staff, but at least you can get your work done and work accomplished. Okay, so yes, now that's basically it for today, for the introduction. Now, this is intentionally meant to be a little bit of a shorter webinar, and we open up for a couple of questions now, as always. But what I want to point you to is a couple of really exciting topics that I'm going to publish. One is about general the notion of project control and turnaround. But then I want to talk specifically more about the topic of project risk. And the reason why I'd like to suggest that is I have seen that it helps a lot of organizations accomplish their development effort, and starting really on the right foot and controlling the project along the way, meaning keep it on track. So it's very important exercise to do upfront and also during the milestone reviews. And what I want to cover is 2 or 3, let's say I take one case study that I can choose from, and I want to show on this case study how the output looks like for, let's say, a static schedule and budget sensitivity analysis, and then on a stochastic level, and then I will take it a level forward on a dynamic level. So probably 2 or 3 approaches I would like to illustrate. And then another area that is, of course, interesting is the exchange between project and product development and market and the organization. Today I showed a little bit let's say the exchange between the development and the service side of the house. But of course, as we are making progress, or let's say as we're perceiving lack of progress, it might have an impact on the organization. Or as we able to promote progress, we might actually win a larger part of the organization, which is then helping us, of course, to win clients in the ecosystem or partners in the ecosystem and so on. So that's an important topic. And I saw actually from the uptake from previous videos and blogs that these topics are really top of mind. One is a topic that was really frequently a lot is about organization dynamics and also how to migrate towards a solution or a service solution. Okay, so I don't want to repeat it too much what I said last time, but it's still valid for today. Make sure that you have feasible plans and that you factor in some of the insights that are coming out of this analysis and the simulations that we're preparing here. The articulation of the plan and the scope of the plan is really important, and make sure that you include also an assumption about the amount of rework and your error rate in the project plan. Then the guidelines for resource allocation. When you're in an executive or C-level role and you're initiating a project about, let's say, a new effort of transforming a company, initiating new projects about product development, make sure that you set very clear guidelines on how to allocate resources to these projects. And if possible, and that will come sooner or later when you are running an organization with both a service-oriented arm and a product-oriented arm, I would strongly recommend pick a good time when to establish dedicated delivery units for these areas, and also dedicated hiring and staffing. That doesn't mean that you should be establishing silos, but a lot of coordination actually is necessary. But when the product efforts and the service efforts can operate independently, it has, of course, less impact, and the system becomes more stable as a whole altogether. So there's more to say about this in the extended module and in the upcoming sessions that we have. So check back. There's a set of new topics coming up about market dynamics, organizational dynamics, and probably also about supply chain dynamics. So keep in mind, we are running the webinar special for the remainder of this this program, which means that you have unlimited access to all the content for the time that the course is being published. So make sure to take advantage of that. All right, so that was it for the main parts. I will be happy to take a couple of questions. As always, there are questions which are submitted through the registration. So if you registered, you can submit your questions, or you can submit them live here in the webinar room. And again, if you want to go to Facebook, I should have called that out a little more specifically, but Facebook, you want to look for Mastering Transformation Dynamics. That's our page. And on YouTube, it's very simple. It's YouTube/Wittigonia. Okay, let me take a look. What do we have here? Again, take advantage of the webinar special. It's still running for a few more minutes here on the webinar. So there's one question here about software development projects. Would it be desirable to run waterfall projects or agile projects? Of course, the answer here is it really depends on what you are trying to accomplish, and also what your organization or your client is most comfortable with, or your organization is also capable of doing. Now, there are great advantages, of course, to the agile method. It may not be for every project, but one advantage is, of course, that when you're running, for example, very lean projects, and you're doing work sprints of, let's say, 2 weeks, for example, and you're doing this in a test-driven approach, that means that you may be able to discover the rework much earlier. That means you can correct the work earlier before it compounds in your development cycle. and you learn something about the product, the process, and the tools that are required to drive better quality through your effort. So I would definitely encourage doing that. Now, here's a question about the impact. You mentioned the impact for the organization. I couldn't agree more. Certainly something that we have been facing in our projects here. And this is a feedback actually that came in from the last webinar, and I wanted to pick up on this. And the question here was how to drive the change in combination between the development team and the other parts of the organization. Now, that's actually a very good topic, and that's why I would like to dedicate some time for it in the organizational session, which is coming up, I think, in a couple of weeks. And so there I'm planning also to show what the implications are and what the scenarios are, the change scenarios, again, using a simulation like we have seen today. But really more on the managerial side of the house, it is important, of course, to involve the stakeholders early. And as early as possible, ideally during the ideation phase, or doing, for example, strategic planning, or when you do scenario planning. It's very important for people to understand what they're signing up for and what the organization is trying to accomplish. So very important to keep people engaged. And secondly, I would like to point out that communication and the, let's say, dissemination of success stories is super important. As you have seen, if you watch the episode about organizational dynamics, the key learning there is that innovations in organizations also spread like, let's say, like a virus, a positive virus, if you want. So people get infected by an idea, they want to be part of that. And the more you get people engaged and the more you're able to spread the great new ideas, the faster the organization is catching momentum and moving to a new state of, let's say, doing business, adopting new technologies, driving new products, or even a new way of working, a new way of behavior sets, a new way of shaping the culture of the organization. And in that context, it is super important, of course, to disseminate success story. And that's where I see a big role of management, but also the project leaders in the organization. I have worked with a number of organizations. Actually, one was a very big one where the CEO came to me in the first kickoff meeting, and he said, you know, one of our key challenges is really to get the great ideas that we have in people's heads into the marketplace. And if I could only find a way to engage the organization and get people going, that would make this a great place. And this is very representative for a lot of organizations. And people want to see the progress, and they want to, of course, know that they're signing up for a project which has a certain success potential. The downside risk is, of course, and you can read about that in the internet in some reports, there's a new trend that, let's say, what I call also the talent, business talent, digital talent, or any people would like to drive innovation, are leaving organizations if they perceive a lack of progress or a lack of innovation or organizational support. That's very much right in the center and in the context of transformation dynamics. And that was one of the main reasons also why I wanted to drive this set of episodes here. Okay, so again, there's more time and space in the extended version and in the Facebook page. So please feel free to sign up and spread the word. And I am very much looking forward to meeting you in the next episodes. And again, if you want to suggest a topic, a question, or a specific simulation based on your experience or what you have heard in the previous sessions, please submit it prior to the talk so I can fold this in. and be happy to do that. So until then, I wish you good luck with your transformation projects, and I see you soon. Bye-bye.